good to know that people found out about this talk from stickers and from like just a poster in here. We organise these meetings with like a programme of discussion topics, and the reason why we put work in January is because we'll all be so delighted to be going back to work
after
if we had any
Christmas.
time off at Christmas. So the title that we've got for this evening is Work, What Is It Good For? But I think one way to approach this question of what work's good for is to ask a slightly different question, which is work, who is it good for? And I think an answer to that is not us. Even if work was an unalloyed pleasure and we absolutely loved what we did from day to day, this is to take my own example as, you know, I mean, in no sense am I saying that I'm hard done by. I'm sort of probably, you know, in quite a sort of privileged bit of the working class. I've got a full-time job, you know, that kind of thing. I get up at 6, get to work at 9, I leave between 5:30 and 6, I get home about 7:15, I go to bed between 11:30 and midnight. So if we take out the time that I spend cooking and eating, that leaves 3.5 hours a day when I am neither working nor sleeping. I would invite you to do your own calculation on this one.
Thank you. Yes.
It's
yeah.
really...
It's a good idea.
Time into that.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Is cooking part of leisure, or cooking is part of being?
Yeah. So 17.5 hours a week, that comes to 14.5% of my time is spent not working or sleeping. So just that demand on your time is a definite thing. But then, you know, work is exactly too bad. Is exactly too bad for a lot of people. I mean, very kindly, while I was doing the research for this talk, the Society of Occupational Medicine very kindly published a very comprehensive study which looks at reasons for people taking time off work sick with work-related issues, and it's a study that covers Great Britain and Ireland and goes back to 2012. And in that study they found over half of work-related absence is for mental health related issues, that's 56%. After that it's what they call musculoskeletal, so bad backs, RSI, that kind of thing. After that, skin problems and breathing problems. And the number one sector for work-related illness is, well, does anyone want to have a guess what the sector is where there's most work-related illness? Teaching, close.
Admin. No?
That's second,
Oh, right.
actually. The number one sector for work-related illness is health and social care, which you could see, you know, sort of it combines work that can be physically challenging and also emotionally extremely draining. So, you know, if work's not good for us, who is it good for? Well, you know, the bosses. Why is that? Well, they get to make money out of us without actually doing much themselves. But what I want to talk about mostly tonight is kind of take the fact that people, you know, that the bosses exploit us, they make money out of us, and I want to talk about how work functions, how it functions socially, as a means of control, as a means of discipline, both what you might call hard and soft forms of control and discipline, how work creates and reinforces hierarchies both within the workplace and outside, and also just to end by thinking if work actually can be any good for us at all. So starting to talk about work as a means of control, as a means of discipline, I want to introduce the idea of enclosure, because one of the things that allowed capitalism to emerge in the 19th century was the enclosure of the commons, where people were forced off the land, and to survive they had to basically become wage labourers. So that act of enclosure was a condition for the emergence of capitalism. And what I want to suggest, well, I find it's quite a nice way of thinking about this, is this process of enclosure continues. This process of enclosure is happening now as capital expands to colonise other areas of our lives. Because, I mean, capitalism is not the same as the factory system, although you might think so sometimes from reading, well, certain bits of Marx. So, where are those dark satanic mills that capitalism creates? Well, one, they're in China because capitalism has become a global system. Not miss much. So, thinking about how capitalism has expanded, it's not only expanded in space to new countries, it's also expanded into our pockets in like mobile technology and into our lives. Because there are things, there's sort of the modern day bad things about work that people talk about, like 0 hours contracts and things like that. They rely on people being contactable all the time, to get called into work. And if you like, work is expanding not only in space, but if you like, expanding inside ourselves and colonising whole new areas that have previously sort of been our piece of the rock. There's a very, very good study which I would urge you all to look at, written by an American feminist scholar called Ali Hochschild, called The Managed Heart, where she introduces the idea of emotional labour, and it's a study of air hostesses figure quite largely in it, and it's almost like they're paid to pretend to be pleasant, and just that sort of dissonance between the sort of the performance of work and that sort of feigning being genuine. I think because that study was written in the 80s, and I think it's spread from that type of industry and has become almost commonplace and ubiquitous in there's some, I don't know if anyone else watches The Apprentice, like real sort of shameful joy television. It's like Big Brother, except you don't care if anyone gets knocked out or not. But every one of them, they talk about being passionate about what they do. And just step back, and this is almost, it's become quite a common thing for people to say about, the most bizarre thing. I mean, I work in the riveting world of databases, and it's sometimes okay. It's a bit like the sense of achievement you occasionally get is a bit like doing a crossword, that kind of thing. But people talk about being passionate about data, and it seems to me it's no longer enough, because this is something that's happened in my own working life. It used to be kind of okay if someone asked you at a job interview, why do you think you'd be suited for this specific role? And you could say something along the lines of, well, I think I'd be quite good at it, and and I've done something like it before. But you're supposed to sort of perform this enthusiasm for even things that if I met someone who was genuinely passionate about data, I would worry about them, really. But it's this.
You're running off.
But this performance, this emotional labour, that's almost like just become part of the deal. So I feel like those are what you might call soft means of control, soft forms of discipline, where the amount of our lives are colonised by work and we're expected to sort of perform enthusiasm. There are, of course, hard controls that discipline us, that force us into work. Workfare being one, the policy introduced in 1995 by tail end of a Conservative government by John Major's government. It was introduced in two areas, Maidstone and Hull. The thing that connects Maidstone and Hull is the Member of Parliament Anne Widdecombe, who was the MP for Maidstone and the Home Office Minister for Hull. So it was piloted in two areas by the Conservatives. Labour rolled it out nationwide, and now it's been ramped up, and the delivery of it has been in effect privatised, where these shady organisations like CTEC get about 600 quid a pop just for the joy of making someone work for their dole money. But before workfare could really bite, it required the biggest change to the benefit system since the Second World War. And that change was the introduction of the job seekers allowance, which replaced unemployment benefit and income support for the unemployed. And for the first time, it became possible for someone claiming unemployment benefits to lose 100% of their money. And this is quite recently, because previously, like, you lost a percentage if you're on a means tested benefit. They couldn't cut it away to absolute zero. And if you like, that took away one of the ways that we had as working people, one of the ways that we had of resisting work. And that way of resisting work is summed up in the simple phrase, I'm not doing that, I'll be better off on the dole. And there are no jobs like that anymore, because of someone, and again, like, the job seekers allowance gave people who work for the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, to direct people who were signing on to do a specific thing. It used to be the case that you had to be available for and actively seeking employment, but you couldn't be made to take a specific course of action. So, you know, people can now be like directed to go on workfare, and that's how the sanctions regime works. So we have soft control and we have hard control, if you like, the carrot and the stick. And another array of carrots and sticks are what you might call the ideology of work. Because you cannot turn on the television or the radio or read the newspaper without some politician of some party talking about hard-working workers who work hard at work with their hard-working families. And it's become just, it slips off their tongues all too easily, you know, this thing of hard-working families, and like, these are the people, you know, you aspire to be in a hard-working family. And I had a little Google, actually, just for the phrase hard-working families, and I'll put it in quotes so he didn't pick up anything similar. So, like, David Cameron, hard-working families, 22,500 results. Ed Miliband, 9,780 results. Nick Clegg, 8,100 results, probably because no one cares what he says. But also, like, they all have their own variants. I mean, David Cameron talks about hard-working families. Ed Miliband occasionally talks about hard-working families, but he also talks about the squeezed middle. And Nick Clegg had this thing a few years ago where he talked about alarm clock Britain, where somehow, like, even having an alarm clock became this aspirational thing. So, you know, just this idea of work, any work at all, being something to aspire to. You know, just this sort of, you know, hard-working families who work hard at work. So, you know, you've got that sort of positive idealisation of being hard-working. But the flip side of that, the alternative, is this almost unbearable thing of being a social problem. You know, being like a scrounger, being a benefit cheat. And we can see how the line between claimant and cheat is just being blurred in the way that people talk about people in receipt of benefits. The most recent example being 2 weeks ago, it was announced that 75% of incorrect housing benefit payments are the result of error or fraud. Not X% was because of error and another X% was because of fraud. Error or fraud, like it's the same thing. It's just like the claiming of the benefit itself is almost like is becoming something that's a bit shameful. And we can see this with the bedroom tax, and it's just this idea of like just saying to ordinary people, like, how dare you have anything other than the absolute bare minimum of stuff that you need to get by? How bloody dare you? How dare you have a spare room? And people who are in work were invited to believe that we, the hard-working workers who work hard at work with our hard-working families, are not like them. Just this introduction of like a hierarchy within the working class, and perhaps it's just the circles I hang about in, I don't know, but I meet very few people who are as keen on their jobs as this idea of like being a hard-working worker who works hard at work. I just don't come across, as I say, it might be the company I keep, but just it's if we just take a step back from these things, just like how has this happened? And speaking of hierarchies, which I was, there is this sense as well in which work creates its own hierarchies, but also reinforces existing hierarchies. I mean, one of the kinds of hierarchy, of division that work creates is dividing us up into like these little micro layers of, because in the olden days there were blue collared workers, there were white collar workers. If you were like blue collar, you wore a boiler suit, you probably got paid in cash every week. If you were white collar, you got to wear a shirt and you got paid monthly, and it went straight into your bank account. But that sort of quite big, quite broad hierarchy has just been, those kinds of divisions have just proliferated. The number of people, these sort of supervisors with virtually no responsibility. But you're a supervisor. You might supervise like a person or two people. I mean, there's a call centre on Old Street where I used to work, which just makes phone calls on behalf of charities, and their lowest rung of supervisor, the first sort of ladder on the hierarchy, they don't get paid any more than the people who work on the phones. But if you like,
less.
Well, and also they don't have to work on the phones.
That's it, yeah.
And some of these people, they're some of the sort of the most. I hesitate to use the word brutal, but like because if they don't do their little job of keeping an eye on 3 or 4 people, they're going to have to go on the phones again, and no one wants to do that. So they're really, and just these tiny like little hierarchies and gradations. And another way we see it is in job title inflation. You might not get a pay rise, but I mean, I work in a sector where virtually everyone has got manager in their job title. The most junior people who work in the sector that I work in have executive in their job title. Those are like first jobbers. And another, so that's the way that work creates its own hierarchies, but it also reinforces existing hierarchies such as gender inequality. So you have the traditional phrase, women having to work the double shift, having to go out to work, and because of patriarchy, because of gender inequality, still being forced to do the most of work in the home. And also there are other kinds of work. Well, there are whole kinds of work which are classified as being women's work, in the caring sector, cleaning, that kind of thing. And these, sex work could be seen as being another one. And these kinds of work are seen as being like in themselves demeaning or degrading. And it's something that women need to be rescued from rather than rather than organising to improve their own lives. And I mean, I'll just leave this open as a question of like, it's an interesting thought experiment to sort of think about like, why is it different for it? Because, you know, I mean, there are several things that I'm fairly crap at. One of them is clean, one of them is keeping my flat clean, and the other one is plumbing. So like, why is it somehow, you know, if I employed a cleaner, why is this worse than me getting a plumber out if I've got a leaky tap? You know, both of these things I could learn to do myself, but if like, oh my god, you can't have a cleaner, you know, not saying I'm going to get one, but you know, so just but just as a thought experiment, you know, why this thing of women's work being, you know, sort of demeaning and therefore badly paid, and therefore demeaning and therefore badly paid, and these things sort of reinforce each other. So what we've seen is a society organised around an imperative to work. It's an imperative to work which is invasive, which is expanding to like cover bits of our lives that previously used to be private, our own little pieces of the rock. An imperative to work which is divisive, and an imperative to work which is hierarchical. And the whole power of capital and the state is turned around making sure that that keeps happening. And we can see, you know, the role. The last time I made this point, actually, 2 coppers walked in, so we'll see if they do it again. The whole weight of capital and the state is turned around keeping us at work, and we see the role of the police. You know, it's coming up to anniversary of the miners' strike of 1984-1985. So I feel like that's a big dramatic example from history. A more recent example is my sense of the student unrest in 2010 now was that the thing that I saw the police being most keen to do is stopping the students mixing with the electricians who were on strike at the same time.
Right.
They were absolutely determined that students and the electricians weren't going to meet up. So this suggests that more is at stake than profits for the bosses, in the words of the slogan. What is at stake in the enforcement of work is capitalism itself, because even though we are divided, isolated, stressed, ill, we are still capable of fighting back. And we see examples, they're small examples, but they're examples still, for, you know, one being the Ritzy Living Wage campaign, which on the face of it could have turned into quite a traditional trade union struggle. They were sort of members of BEC too, I think. But they turned it into a campaign which united workers at the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton with people in the community, and also Eric Cantona. There's the successes that they've been in what are called wage theft cases. So, you know, someone gets fired or they're not getting paid all their wages. You know, these are like the Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty, the Solidarity Federation, the Industrial Workers of the World are all taking on these wage theft cases, which, like, you know, if you imagine that basically you've got organisations which contain a lot of revolutionaries are fighting for wage labour. You know, they're like, this is how far we've come, that this idea that workers should get paid for the work that they do requires revolutionaries to make it happen. But then the bosses have had it so long their own way for so long that, you know, even the most basic things need to be fought for. And like Lambeth College, who are on all-out strike at the moment. So there is a lot at stake in work. There is a lot at stake in the enforcement of work, and it is hard to imagine a world without it, because, you know, the whole of, you know, our society is organised around work. And I remember, like, my mum's objection to anarchism which she articulated about 30 years ago, which is, but no one would do anything. Well, not if work was like what it is now. And I mean, anarchists are famous for being annoying by saying that they don't have blueprints for the future. But I'm nearly finished now. I'll end with a quote from Karl Marx, of all people. Quite a famous quote. So as you say, like, keep in mind, no blueprints. This is Karl Marx's description. It's one of the few descriptions that there is of what life would be like in a communist society. So he says, in communist society, where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for one to do one thing today and another tomorrow. To hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticise after dinner, just as I have in mind, without becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman or critic. Not great for the vegans, but just this idea, because I think, as I said right at the beginning, there are elements of what I do that I find quite enjoyable, but it's having to do it all the time and forever. And if we can, and I mean, just to think, and I'll finish on this because I think this is one of the reasons why I stay interested and engaged in politics, is just to apply that quote from Marx to yourself and think, what would be your three things? Because my dad's three things would be being a pianist, being an engineer, and being a gardener. But the one he ended up doing all the time, which he did enjoy doing, was engineering. And because he was an engineer working in cold conditions, it fucked his hands up so much that he could barely pick up a knife and fork, let alone play the piano. And I grew up watching someone just being crushed by work, even though he was doing part of what he wanted to be doing. I mean, he's fine doing it at home. Like, our fence was the only one that didn't get washed away by the floods a few years ago, so he was delighted about that, exercising his engineering skills. But just that thing of being forced to do something year in, year out, even though you potentially enjoy part of it. So that's it. I'm aware that I haven't talked about how to organise against work. I also haven't talked about what if you do something which is genuinely useful and enjoyable. But hopefully we can get there in the discussion afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you. So.
I was going to say, I think work's a means of social control as well, because you think about it, forever saying about in a few years' time we're going to have these technologies and people will hardly have to work at all. Well, the technologies have developed, but we never reach this state of never having to work at all. It's because, if I would suggest, it's because if work was cut down so much, then the bosses would be out of control. We'd be doing something different, wouldn't they? They need to have people, the majority of people working, even though if you sat down objectively, you could say, lots of things could be done in far less time. Yeah, if you look at the amount of time people are working now, it's actually gone up. I think the UK is one of the worst. People work 48 hours a week. Even the laws that say you can't work more than a certain number of hours a week, there's ways around it, so that quite a lot of people are working silly hours, and also things like computers and, as you were saying, mobile and all that malarkey, means that people are expected to take work home, work at home, work on the train, work on the toilet, God knows what. There's no end to it, is it? So Yeah, I think that's all that as well.
I'd like to add that from Mark's description, we went far but on the opposite direction, because as a matter of fact in this society you can't afford career changes. The more you change, the worse it gets, because you have to start from the bottom again. You consider a beginner, nobody takes you seriously. It feels like you're inventing yourself every couple of years or so. Instead, then society encouraging this and embracing changes and the ability for you to develop some other skills or doing some other things, you all of a sudden you're losing up. So you're better off sticking to a job. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. If you don't like it, but if you stick long enough, then there is a progression, there is a pay rise, and all that comes with it. So the society actually encourages you not to change and to stick to what you have if you have it. So for you to get a progression, get a pay rise, get promotion, get mortgage, and so on and so forth, and reinforce the idea of control and maintain the establishment, really.
To carry on with the talking about like the Marx talking about what would you actually do in a communist society, and people were always saying, oh well, you do nothing because you just wouldn't work. To bring an example of like my life currently right now at this moment, I was working until last week as a temporary worker in the NHS in a community mental health team. It was only temporary. It was filling in for someone who was away, who had like a family problem. They came back, and I'm currently now unemployed, looking for work, not doing anything. I'm sitting at home doing my own thing, trying to find work and what have you. If I didn't have to work, what would I do tomorrow? I would go back to work. I would go back to this community mental health team because I really actually valued the role. I was only there for a couple of months, but I saw how worth it was, and I also saw the fact that there weren't enough people. I mean, with the current cuts to the NHS, they just can't afford to employ enough people, and everyone there is incredibly stressed. They've got far too much work on. If I didn't have to work, if I didn't have to pay rent, pay for my electricity and bills and stuff, tomorrow morning I would go. I might go like at noon instead of 9 o'clock. And I might only do 3 hours work.
You finish at 8 though, yeah?
Yeah, well I finished whenever it felt like it. But I'd actually have a reason to go out and do it, rather than having to be forced into it. And there are so many things that I think we kind of assume, or people who say that sort of, oh well, no one will do anything, assume the same relation to work that we have now, which is I wouldn't do that if I wasn't getting paid. But if you didn't have to get paid, if you weren't being forced into it, if you could still survive, then I think you'd actually find yourself doing a lot of things that you would never have imagined yourself doing. A lot of, not just people always come out with creative examples, which obviously are great. I would spend lots of time playing piano and teaching people as well. I've done teaching in the past, which is another thing I can't afford to do at the moment. But also just things like helping out in the NHS, like helping out in actual things, like helping out your local corner shop, doing anything.
This should be the work. I mean, we should think about work, the meaning of work. Sorry, I don't like this. So just change your idea. I absolutely agree, because it's a matter of fact of what we are talking about. But we should see the work like our choice to contribute in a kind of way to our group, our society, our world. For me, I've changed a lot of time, jobs and career and these kind of things.
Hello.
Hiya.
You're right.
Any chairs?
This is a chair. This one there.
Oh, sorry, carry on.
Well, I just agree with your point. I would work for free. I mean, the problem are the money, and is the process behind the privilege. Because, for example, where you were talking about to be a supervisor, people don't do supervisor because they want more money, or maybe because they don't want to answer to the phone, but because it's a prestige things. They feel like they achieved something. They feel like they got something more, and this is the trouble. This is the problem. The idea of work doesn't have to be that, but we should work, everyone, because I think it's right to work. The problem is not the work, is the meaning of the work, is the process of the work, is the money. So, like Marx say, everyone should do something that like to do, because I'm sure that everyone enjoy to do something, even if it's just to have to grow carrots. We all like carrots. I've worked for free in my life, and it was a privilege. I worked for free in this country because I had the opportunity to have the benefit. In my country, it doesn't exist that, so do a volunteer job is something that you can do just if you are rich. So I think we come from the same country.
Possibly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm from Napoli. So yeah, the problem is the idea of work more than the work, because yeah, everyone should work. I met different people that they don't want to work, and I don't think I agree with them, because you have to give something to the society, to even if it's just a word, you have to be good in something that you like. Sorry, spoke too much.
Nick, you want your...
Yeah, you've got the other side of the coin, which is always a pool of unemployment, and that's there, so that you can point, if somebody's in work, say, look, if you step out the line, that's where you'll end up, without very little money.
Yeah.
And that they I don't think there's ever been a period of full employment, if you can call it that. And they can't be under capitalism. In certain periods after the Second World War, there was a time when the number of unemployed in this country was quite low, but the result of that was that it was quite interesting at work. You know, because there were so many jobs then, people used to say, well, fuck you. If someone, you know, some boss or manager or foreman says something to them, I'm out of here, go out and get another job. Easy enough. You know, there was a period when that happened. And I think part of what they're doing now is, you know, they're driving wages down, they're making,
What is that?
Straight down
Hang
the toilet
up
or
or
something.
pick up.
I don't know.
Pick up.
Yeah.
Pick up and tell them to.
Yes.
Spanish police, I think, to get in.
Oh, well, what's that?
So you could just walk out of a job and then into another
Yes,
one.
you could at one point, and people did. All the time.
You say they're driving.
Now they're driving wages right down,
Yeah.
and you know, they're making conditions worse and making work longer hours, as Nigel covered all of that. They always need a big pool of unemployment as a threat there, you know, always need it, and that's the other side of it. So you've got people, some of that lot, they actually want to work and they can't. You know, there's whole areas of Britain, well, right around the world, you know, areas where there aren't any jobs anymore. South Wales is an example. Parts of the south coast, you know, I can think of places like Ramsgate or Hastings, and in the north as well, you know, northeast especially, you know, whole areas aren't any jobs anymore, you know, and the poverty there is pretty appalling. So you know, that's what they need. Going on to another subject, you know, the whole idea of work, you know, in a free society, in a different society, a lot of the sort of shite we do, you know, the shite jobs we do, wouldn't be there anymore. You know, think about it. You know, where would all the ad jobs go? Where would all the jobs involving, you know, forcing you, you know, like in a
Debt recovering,
bailiffs, all of that, you know, you can go through job after job and get rid of them. A lot of the time, you know, I've been in jobs you really needed to work about 2 or 3 hours. The rest of it, you were just looking around and, and you're using the computer, and DOSing. You were taking that. You weren't actually working, except you had to be at work.
Yeah.
So you were stealing their time back from them. That's one way you resist. But at the same time, you were still fucking stuck there.
Yeah.
Still stuck there, and you couldn't get out, and you still had to put up with sort of these creatures who are managers. These sort of sorry excuses for your humanity. Telling you what to do, and you know a lot better about the job than they ever did. That's another thing about work. The sort of doesn't bear thinking about, really, does it?
Unfortunately, we have to every single fucking day. I said, unfortunately, we do have to think about it every day.
Yeah, I know. I don't anymore because I'm retired.
I mean, if I could just come back particularly on that last point of, and I mean, again, like, I'm making myself sound ancient, but like that this is a change I've seen in my own working life of 20 odd years, is that even skiving has become very individualised, because like my early jobs, like skiving was a communal activity. Like everyone would buy a different newspaper. We would do all the, so we had as many crosswords as possible, basically. And like when it was quiet, we would communally do all the crosswords in all the papers. And what do people do now? If you walk around an office with an eye to people's screens, you see that distinctive blue of Facebook. Like even skiving is no longer a communal activity. And there used to be, like, it's like back in the good old days, like there were places when I worked in the print industry, like we had hiding places around the factory.
Oh yeah.
Like which was probably like a bit dangerous because we used to go and smoke in the skip with all the paper waste, but you could have chosen that one better. But there were little hidey places around, and people knew that, and it was like, you just come for it, But just that. And some of it is technology, but some of it is just people being like, you can't possibly like not be passionate about your job for a split second. So you can't be seen to skive in front of other people. You just have to sort of do it quietly on your own computer.
Just to sort of link two things that's sort of been said about, with all the technological improvements, why are we not doing a 4-hour day or a 3-hour day? And then also Nigel's tirade against the managerial class. I think there's fewer and fewer people actually doing productive labour, and more in the clerical positions, in the administration, and then in the whole the corporate behemoths and how they interact with each other, like the corporate law, advertising, how they intrude onto your life, advertising and PR. I think part of the answer is that it's not a simple workers in a factory, manager takes the profit anymore. It's workers in a factory, 100 of them and 100 of other people who aren't actually producing anything. They're just spending the money, just kind of profiting from people's labour, but not in a they don't own the capital, but they own jobs which still profit from other people's labour. So it's kind of this other class, another sort of form of exploitation has kind of come into it, which is why these people have to justify themselves in cracking the whip over your head.
I'd just like to throw a question. Can somebody, or does anyone has an idea of why there is this divisions of job, labor and money in some kind of sectors, and then, as you said, there is some jobs that for some reason, I work in a corporate environment myself, so I see the most amazing things in there. These people, just because they create a logo and few designs on cups and and postcards, all things that lay around tables in the cafes and restaurants, all bits and bobs, so that you literally bombarded by the logo everywhere. you don't need to be an expert in anything. Just have an idea. Anybody can do it, in my mind. These people work from home and they get £12,000 a month. A month.
Yeah.
I saw the invoices and I'm thinking, I processed the invoice. And I can give you so many examples. Like I've worked for a couple of days in this reception for international law firm, commercial international. And these women, they stand in this reception for 25 years. And I was thinking, why? Because they're the mortgage and everything. They don't use Word, Excel. They use 2 buttons on the keyboard, and they maybe welcome 20 people a day, 30 people a day. They earn £30,000 a year. Not joke. They told me the salary today. I was shocked, shocked. And then all the rest. Well, I don't say these people in the law firm building actually, because I can imagine. But so many other people to work the ass off somewhere else, like coffee shops or you name it, anywhere. They don't earn not even half of the salary to start with, and they work. And these people don't do anything. So the point is, going back to what Nick was saying, how much people do really work in the work for what they get paid at times.
I work in a bookshop and I'm on a minimum wage. And if I have to choose to be home and stay at home on the door or go to work, I would prefer to go to work, because I think I'm lucky that I'm surrounded by beautiful things. So I accept the idea to struggle in London with £1,000 per month. In the meanwhile, I think, okay, now I'm doing this, tomorrow we will see what's happening around. Now, I mean, I will not be in London if I didn't have another reason to be in London. I will not be here, because here the situation it's great. I mean, I'm on £12,000 per year. It's crazy. How can you afford the rent? I'm 32. I live with my partner, and I think that this is right. I mean, after I lived with hundreds of people. I need my whole, just my whole. I don't want a custom, and you can't afford it. All the people that works with me are rich, because they work for
they can only want
hobby.
They can afford, yeah.
Because
That's
their
it.
parents can buy them a house, so they don't have to think about rent. And not just the people that work with me now, but basically in all my life I've been surrounded from university, from people that have this opportunity to have a family that economically support them. So I'm here, but I don't know how people can be in this city. Okay, there was the squatting things. I heard about it. I know people involved in that, and this was, from my point of view, a great things that you can actually occupy a house, but not anymore. So I don't know. Some of you is from London. Some of you have been living here all the life. I mean, it's really hard. And everyone is coming to London because London got opportunities and got jobs and got. No. So we should do something.
We should do something.
Not just living, like I've already done a lot of time.
Well, there are, probably most of us know, or all of us know, but there are quite a lot of housing struggles going on at the moment, and some of them are being won as well, because housing is a big crisis. And the reason it's a big crisis, as you say, is because housing is getting more and more expensive, and there's been scarcely any social housing, housing for ordinary people built for years. If you looked at a graph of housing built by governments and councils the last 30-40 years, it would just be like almost nothing, going down and down and down. And yet there's, as you say, London is a big magnet. It's pulling people in from all over the UK, it's pulling people in from abroad, because of all the jobs and opportunities. But it's just more and more people in a finite space, and so it just gets more and more mad, doesn't it? It all gets more and more expensive. The fares go up all the time. and yeah, it's just crazy. So and there's various on top of all that, there's various things like Nigel mentioned, like the bedroom tax and cuts in people's benefits, cuts in housing benefit, which are just forcing ordinary people out of their housing. They can no longer afford, to live where they're living. They're being forced out of, some of them being forced out of London, forced away from their families, and it's just crazy.
Yeah,
But but there are people fighting against it and joining together around it. So I'm not saying everything's wonderful or everything's going to be wonderful next week, but things are happening, and they need to happen because we're in quite a bad situation.
So to return to this theme of technology, I remember there used to be a programme on British TV called Tomorrow's World, and every week there was a new thing that would mean that, like, one, where's my hovercraft, and two, like there was, and it wasn't just about labour saving devices and that we wouldn't have to work anymore. I remember this feature about nuclear power, like they were going to build a load of new nuclear power plants, and the electricity that it produced would be so cheap that it wouldn't make economic sense to send people electricity bills. But amazingly, this imperative to, you need money to pay for things, so you need to work to get money and all that. And the other thing is, like, people been talking about working from home, because I had a job, well, my job before this one, I could work from home for 2 days a week. And initially I thought, this is fantastic, it's going to be amazing. But I actually found it quite stressful, and the reason why I found it quite stressful is that, like, I just didn't have the sort of human interaction, just like and there was this thing on my computer that some of you might have on your computers at work called Microsoft Link, which markets itself as being like basically MSN chat but for work, so it integrates with your Outlook email and stuff. But what it also does is it measures it counts the time elapsed since your last keystroke on your computer. And like, so you've got your little profile on your Microsoft Link, and there's a nice encouraging little green stripe next to your name. And if you leave your computer for 5 minutes, or even if you like perfectly legitimately doing work related things that don't involve typing, your little stripe goes from green to amber. And then if you're away, and then it goes to red. And like, you can go in and like change it from 5 minutes to like 2 months, the time it takes to do that. But just that thing of being spied on, something that's supposedly like, it's a way of keeping in touch with people at work. And like, I actually found that like quite an isolating experience. But actually, I found myself getting quite anxious about, I should have got one of those little. They had these glass flamingo things in the 70s. That sort of nodded up and down. I could have got one of them for on my space bar, but sadly I didn't think on. And lastly, is about the pool of unemployment. Is, I think, this, with the introduction of the job seekers allowance, because there's always, this is traditionally called like the reserve army of labour, and this isn't just something that like lefties and anarchists talk about. In Nigel Lawson's memoirs, Nigel Lawson was Chancellor of the Exchequer during Margaret Thatcher's reign of terror. And he talks about cabinet meetings where they discussed creating mass unemployment before they could take on the unions. Because there is a difference between capitalism and conspiracy theory, but every now and then people do meet in rooms and decide how they're going to stitch us up. And that was an occasion, because they wanted to take on the miners, they wanted to take on the steel workers, and they consciously created mass unemployment so that they could do it. And like that traditional reserve army of unemployment, which makes people a bit less willing to sort of go sod you or get another job, has become a conscript army of the unemployed because of workfare and because of job seekers allowance, because like people have no choice. If someone is instructed, they don't have to, but given the choice between applying for a job and absolutely no money for a few months, then needs must, because there's someone, a piece of advice from early on in my working life who said, well, why do we need to work? He said, well, you need work to buy food, because if you don't eat, you don't shit, and if you don't shit, you die.
But now we know them.
More words of wisdom. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to add that, it's no secret that there is in macroeconomics taught at universities and schools, wherever, that there is such a thing as a perfect level of unemployment. And especially since the 70s, and we switched from more like demand management at a capitalist level to supply side management focusing on monetary policy. The fight against inflation is also linked to putting up unemployment, because if you don't have a lot of money, you're not going to be buying shit, so inflation's not going up. But it's also a mechanism to divide the working class, as you touched upon, break up organised action. And also, I think to add to the workflow and all of that, the army of unemployed, and to go back to what you were saying about the technology, there's a whole set of technological evolutions which have greatly increased the mass of long-term structurally unemployed people who can't get out. And what's interesting to see is that this pool of long-term unemployed is also, more and more affecting the middle class type jobs. And also why we haven't actually achieved diminishing work hours is that if you do that, you have a problem with effective demand. Who's going to be buying shit if these jobs are disappearing? So I think then that goes back to the proliferation of so many more useless jobs, completely fucking useless.
Yeah.
And because they have to create some sort of jobs to keep us there and to keep us in the environment where they can reproduce the values and the ideological conformity that they need to have, to manufacture our the consent of the general populace to our exploitation, basically.
Well, now I'll jump in. I think you said earlier about how there's no blueprint, and I actually, one of the big bugbears I have about the struggle for communism and all the rest of it is that I actually think we should actually have a bit of blueprint, because I think the problem is that we need to say which jobs aren't going to exist in the future, and we're going to need to say one of the big objections to anarchism is who's going to do the shit jobs, and we need to answer those questions, and we need to talk about how we can do incentives and how we can do this and this, and how we're going to run potentially prisons aren't going to function in the capacity that they exist now, but we're still going to have to potentially deal with certain social problems, and how are we going to deal with that? Who's going to deal with those people? There are certain jobs and there's certain ways of doing things in the future, particularly if we're talking about running, emergency care and things like this, that I think you need to look into. I think the problem is that we seem to hold both the anti-work and the requirement to do work, in the sense that we need to build a future society that needs to be overcome, and we need to transcend that kind of that duality, if you see what I mean. And I think that's something that we need to discuss and sort of flesh out.
I studied economics in university, and I looked a lot into participatory economics. And as you were saying, that there is a lack of a blueprint for the future in terms of anarchism, and participatory economics presents a theory which is balanced jobs complex. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it's a theory whereby it eliminates hierarchy in the workplace by dividing the road task, so that no one owns the means of production, or everyone owns the means of production. Whereas in capitalism, the means of production is owned by a very small minority. So in participatory economics, that theory would mean that everyone would own the means of production, and no one would own the means of production. Therefore, in a company, the task would be divided. So there wouldn't be a particular job where someone sweeps the floor, or there wouldn't be a particular job where someone supervises the guy who's sweeping the floor. Each one would have to divide tasks in a pretty fair in a pretty fair manner. And in such a system, there would be a place for people to learn more skills and for people to develop and evolve in different variety of skills.
I don't know, does anybody know SEMA, the food company?
Yeah.
The food company.
Yeah,
Whole food.
they're like a food co-op and they sell whole foods and stuff. So
Cooperative.
you get like organic foods and stuff from them. But that's basically how they run their company. It's a workers' cooperative.
Right.
And you'll be like on the factory floor Monday, Tuesday. You'll be doing the invoices Wednesday. Thursday you'll be making a new logo. And they literally give everybody a chance to do every different job in the company. Yeah, and they're pretty. I mean, as far as I'm aware, they're pretty successful. Like, yeah.
I think what Adam said is right, though, that we need to have strong ideas about future society, and that. But what that doesn't mean, I think one reason that anarchists shy away from it and libertarians is that they sort of think that means that here's a rigid thing this is exactly how it's going to be, you know. And obviously, if we're going to have a social revolution that's going to create a truly communist society, that's only going to come about through the vast majority of people fighting for it and creating it. And so, how can we, 23 people and a dog, say now this is what's going to happen? Well, A, it's more than that. I can see them. Nick doesn't. It's 23 people, a dog, and a parrot. I can tell you. But we can come up with ideas, but those aren't rigid. We're not going to force on people, and they will have an input, and things will change. But I would suggest we do have quite a lot of ideas, and it's not just drawing on us, is it? It's drawing on people around us, or people around the world, and it's drawing on history as well. So, we shouldn't say, either you do have a. Yeah.
There's a store here.
We shouldn't be sort of thinking, either we say nothing for fear of being sort of, we're dictating to people. This is exactly how it's going to be, or well, you see what I'm saying. Not being very articulate. So, yeah, I think we should have a lot. We should be coming out with lots of things about what we can do. And I would say. Nigel was asking earlier, what about? To me, there is a contradiction now in work. Now, as we talk about work as paid labour, I'd say even in jobs that are useful, like the health service or care or various other things, growing food. There is a contradiction because the ideology of having to make a profit conflicts with care and things. It conflicts with other things, doesn't it? As we can see with farming, so much farming is industrial farming that's totally messed up because they're just trying to maximise yields, whatever the cost. Mash up the countryside and everything, just so you can and mash up animals. Feed fish to cows, and or any amount of nonsense. Because that's what profit's about, isn't it? Anything is all right as long as it makes money.
Sort of combine what you were talking about, like blueprints of ways that society would be better organised around work, but relating it back to what you said a while ago about this idea that particularly politicians come out with hard-working workers, like that's the you make yourself into a proper person by showing yourself to be a hard-working person, but of course that whole thing completely screws over parts of society where there are people that aren't as physically able to do work. This the stool with this little mic on it here is actually quite a good little symbol, because there are some people that wouldn't actually even be able to come to this talk because of perhaps of physical disabilities or whatever, and that's obviously one reason why that recording might actually be a very good idea. And I think if we're going to be talking about like what the world with work, rather, I don't want to say the world of work because that sounds horrible, but like unlike under a better society, we have to consider how we enable everyone, not presuming that we're all just exactly the same, we've all got the same bodies and the same minds, and that we're all able to do the same things. I think theorising, thinking about how to not just to not exclude, but to like explicitly bring everyone in, like to have a way of looking at work that isn't, we're talking about seeing work as a productive thing, like work as a good thing, like everyone can do something. It's just that a lot of the types of work that some people can do just aren't valued in like our society.
Do you know Marina Leda? Have you ever heard of this village in Spain? Yeah? For example, this is... But people have to die. People have to fight hard. So, how many of us got this can stay in front of a gun? Or, I mean, you have to see blood before to have some right. So we can have a lot of amazing ideas, but if we don't have the strength the courage to...
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But I think also as anarchists in today's society, I think we have a duty to also, organise work as we can. And, we don't have the means of production, but I think we have a scope to organise work amongst ourselves in a completely different way. There's cooperatives all over the places, there's community development bodies that are doing some fantastic work, often organised on quite anarchist principles. It's democratic, it's run by the participants but also by the people providing the service. And I think we're going towards a society where virtually, also in the terms of public services, there's a massive privatisation happening, so it's the user who has to pay. So, if we're all going to be consumers for public services, well, let's collectivise it. Let's come together and try and, get some doctors to come along and provide mental health care, and we run it. And, it's not at all a simple thing, and I think it would be at a very local level, and it could grow, and if it becomes too dangerous, it will be, it could be completely taken out, and there will be blood and all of it. But I think it would be a more concrete way of showing people this is how work can be organised, this is maybe how we could organise it at a bigger level, because on the other hand we don't know what a collective of people will decide in the future, because I do agree with the fact, even say what is useful work, to some people, what they might want to do is completely and utterly irrelevant to everybody else, but you have to respect that for that individual, that for him to fulfill himself, he needs to be doing that useless task that we think is useless. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But that's not a problem. I don't see that as a problem as long as it's not hurting anyone else. That's all.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's hard to define what is
creating a
useful
system
work.
to facilitate everyone to be able to be fulfilled and whole people and live a happy life rather than a stressed, oppressed life.
But the answer is community, isn't it? It's integrating work into... Work is a part of life, not life is a part of work. How we are at the moment is everything revolves around work. And all this, as Nigel was saying, this gobbledygook about hard-working families are working while they're working, while they're working, while they're... it's just... It's saying that everything must revolve around work, and it's trying to obscure the fact. It's just trying to make out that, saying that anyone who claims benefit is a scrounger or whatever, which is cobblers and shite. But also it's trying to obscure the fact that loads of people are on benefits, like millions of people are people who are working, and they're on benefits as a way of making ends meet, as a way of, even where both, if you talk about a family, even where both partners are working, in paid work, to look after their kids, they still need to claim money because they're on such shit wages, and that's the reality. But they want to cover that up, you've got to be, everyone's got to be slaving away, and they're going to drive benefits down as far as possible, and all this sort of stuff, and that's why they all, across the spectrum, they just adopt all this talk, this whole ideology. I mean, it's not that long, I'm 50, but it's not that long ago now it's like a Pavlovian, it's just like a reflex. Benefit means scrounger. They've managed to do that through the politicians, through the press. 20 years ago that wasn't the case, but now because they every day, all the time you get this message,
Yeah, I think there was a case of not that long ago, the Tories sent out millions of pamphlets to people saying, this is where the government's money is being spent. And it had something like 25% on basically welfare. And within welfare there were so many different things like fire services and all these things that had nothing to do with welfare, but were just lumbered in there. To say, oh, look at the massive savings we have to do here, when in reality it's a much, much smaller part of the budget. And then, paradoxically, it's also these benefits that, will keep the system up, will keep those hard-working families who've got them benefits to be able to rent from the fucking landlord, who'll be able to go to Starbucks and buy their coffee in the morning. All these things are all interlinked, and they're going to push it so far down that in the end, it could actually end up, very bad for them too.
I think I read the highest proportion of the welfare bill is actually pensions. I can't see anyone protesting against pensions. It's but when they'll just come out with one figure. They'll say, oh, the welfare bill or whatever, and not break it down into what it actually means. And like you said, a huge amount of people actually in work, and it's things like housing benefit, because their rent is far too high to be covered by their wages.
I wanted to go back to what Nigel said when your mum said that and in anarchism nobody would do anything, and by the discussion you actually understand that even if there would be such a society, we will actually have to work double. Because to be able to switch one thing to the other one, learn more skill, to be able to be useful to yourself, to other people, you have to actually put yourself at use a lot more. You have to be more concentrated, more on it, rather than just wake up in the morning, switch your brain off and go to work for 6, 7, 8 hours, 5 days a week. So I actually think that if that would be the case, we'll have to work a lot more than we actually do. And in fact, I believe that work, for what it is nowadays, so it's always been considered from the beginning, it's actually a form of escapism and not to do anything. Because after you work, majority of people don't do anything. Go home, watch television, go to sleep. So this is actually a way of putting people in a position of not doing anything besides using the computer for such hours, because after that, people don't do anything else for anyone else. You're lucky if you find somebody that wants to go to the gym, but other than that, nobody does any volunteering, nobody paints, nobody produces any music for the sake of it. So that's the problem actually. This work thing is actually producing for a system that makes the money and the profits for some other people, very few people as we said, but for the rest of the world it's actually causing misery, because there's no real production for the goods of anybody or everybody, if you know what I mean, if I made myself clear.
I think Nigel said at the start that you get about 3.5 hours of free time a day. I don't think you actually do. You get 3.5 hours to prepare yourself for the
not working.
You get prepare yourself, rest, recover, and get ready for the next day of work.
It seems to make the doubly make no sense whatsoever that we're working so much more time and so much more emotional energy when there's at the same time so many, an increasing number of people just without any job, without anything to do. There doesn't seem to be much of a reason why we couldn't just work less and then those jobs be spread out across more people. It's just like as someone was saying before, it's about having a pool of unemployed people. It's because then capital can expand. It needs that pool of unemployed people because it constantly needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It needs to draw from this pool of unemployed people. But it just seems absurd that you've got people who have to work 2 jobs to survive, and then people who not to do. Actually, there was another thing I remembered an interesting example, because you talked about hard and soft control, and like you had like emotional labour on the one hand, and then more sort of like more force on the other. I remembered Pret-a-Manger. I don't know if you've read about them. You know this whole thing with like mystery shoppers or whatever. You know, some spy comes in basically. I think it was Pret-a-Manger. We did like they have this thing where you've got to be like ultra friendly, like you know you're talking about these sort of emotional labour. Yeah, everyone has to be really friendly, and but they get these mystery shoppers come in, and if they're not satisfied with how friendly the service was, they get reported. But not only that, if they get reported, everyone loses their bonus on the team. So not only have you got that emotional labour of I have to be happy all the time, but you've also got the spying on each other sort of panopticon sort of, you know, ultra surveillance thing amongst your work colleagues. Not even just a boss looking at you. It's like everyone is surveying everyone else, and that's like, you know, it doesn't. Even if you end up working less hours, or if you carry on working 37 hours, that kind of stress on top of it, like the stress of surveillance and the stress of having to perform, like being happy, that's, you know, bullshit.
I think that's, you know, I was saying earlier about the contradiction in, you know, I'm in care work. I was thinking, to me, it's contradictory in a way. If you're in something like nursing or care work or looking after kids, the idea that you're being paid to do it and you know 40 hours a week or whatever, you're being nice all the time or whatever. I think those things have got to be divided out more generally. You know, it's like Nigel was saying earlier about women still expect, you know, women with kids are still expected to, you know, go to work during the day, and then they still do the majority of housework and childcare and cooking and everything else. It's just too much, you know. All these things are good, but they're not good when a small group, I know women aren't a small group, you know what I'm saying, 51% of the population, you know, out of all the people, it could be, if it was divided equally, it'd be a very different animal to what it is now, is what I'm saying. And that's my perspective on supporting people who need additional help, you know, people with disabilities or young children or whatever it is. If it was shared more generally and was a more communal thing, then it would be a different thing. You know, look, kids are wonderful. Looking after kids is great, but to do it you know, most of the time, every day, is a chore. Years ago, I helped out a mate of mine one day a week. I looked after her young baby, and I thought, how the fuck does anyone do this 7 days? You know, I enjoyed it, but I thought, you know, this is. So these things do need to be shared out, because it takes, if it's too much, if it's full on, if it's all the time, if it's not shared out, it becomes a chore, and it becomes onerous, and people can't do it properly. You know, they're because they're not looking after themselves, and you know, things like discipline become heavier and harder than they need be for the carer and for the other person. You know, and because you know, people rightly talk about abuse these days, and you know, it's in the wider sense of the word. Well, people who are being looked after abuse their carers as well, and that goes across the board. But what I'm particularly thinking of is, say, people in a relationship, and one side of it has got Alzheimer's or something, right? A husband, wife, you know, other gay partner, whatever it is, and they can. You know, it's not uncommon for them to be abusive in the way they treat the other person, you know, because the other person is locked into that relationship and they're probably getting little or no help, and yet they're getting grief back off the other person. They might even be getting hit and all sorts by the other person, you know, who can't necessarily help it if they've got dementia. You know, who are you? You've been married to you for 40 years, you know. So, well, I think I made my point. These things need to be shared out, and to me it is sort of contradictory to say to someone, right, you're a full-time nurse all the time, you know, 40 hours a week for 40 years or whatever it is, all those things. You know, these things do need to be shared out, but I don't see it as a problem, because we're not saying that everyone is equally skilled and that everyone can do these things, because we all have different skills and can do different things, although I'm sure we all have several skills, you know, a variety of skills. But I don't see it as a problem, because this is one of the things that a lot of people have said. How it is at the moment is you're either doing some job which is does your head in, even if you like it, or you're at home, you know, with no money and not seeing people. And one of the things that people miss about work, paid work is that, isn't it? Your social life generally, unless you're you know, got lots of money or whatever, you have very little social life because you can't get out and see people, or even if you do see people, you're in that silly situation where you go out with your mates down the pub or something, and they can all buy drinks, and you can never do a, you know, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it?
Sorry, I have to go.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting towards the end of our allotted time anyway, so any last bites at the cherry? Any more contributions? Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to round off or if you wanted to...
Yeah, round off.
Okay. So, I mean, one phrase that has come up again and again and again in various contexts this evening is, it makes no sense. It makes no sense for workfare providers to get paid 600 quid a pop to get people off the dole when they don't find jobs, but the imperative is to enforce labour. It makes no sense for the real recipients of benefits are not the claimants. The real recipients of benefits are landlords who get the housing benefit and bosses who don't pay a living wage. That makes no sense. And I think it goes back to this thing of like, there is a motive in the enforcement of labour which is something beyond and something other than the profit motive. And you know, we've talked about a fair few of those. That's really cocked up my big finish, but there you go. Thank you all for coming. I'll walk over to the next one, because as I said right at the beginning, the one in January was about work, because we'd all gone back to work after Christmas. The one in February, which is on Thursday, February the 26th, is called Health Warning, Crisis in the Health Service. The reason it's in February is because it's near Valentine's Day and we love our NHS, I think. So that's the next one, Thursday, February the 26th.
I'm finished.
Yeah.